So from the previous video, once the link of reaction or reactive intention fills up and reaches a threshold, it causes this new link to start, which I like to call mental state degradation or even just selfing. Now, this almost feels like the boundary of your head is starting to tighten up or thicken up, or it's increasing the feeling of being boxed inside your head, or rather, boxed up inside your head. This is related to an increase in the sense of being a separate, distinct self, an increase in ego. Now, why do I call this mental state degradation? So, I think we should take an example. Now, let's imagine we could rate your mental state along a rating of 0 to 100. So, 100 being a very sublime sense of peace, equanimity, deep contentment, and happiness. 50 being an average okay day. 40 being a day where, yeah, things aren't going really well and you feel like things slightly suck. 10 being like being in severe anxiety and depression, or just severe neediness in general. And 0 being violent towards oneself or others and potentially causing them harm as well. Now, your mind can be in any one of these states at any given point of time and can move up and down between these states as well. So, these states are pretty impermanent themselves as well. But let's say you started off your day pretty okay, around state 50, and then something happened and that caused you to become angry and you acted out of it. So, reacted out of it. After a few minutes, that situation is over, but you still feel like your day or even your week is ruined, even hours after that original incident. Sounds familiar? What happened was that your mental state fell from, let's say, state 50 or level 50 down to level 40 or something. And now you just start feeling the side effects of that. Now, as I suggested, this degradation happens because of an increase in the sense of being a separate self through this process that I call selfing. This is like the softer sense of self that you had because of attention, like just being an observer, but that's sort of hardening up suddenly as well. And as we know, in terms of biology or evolutionarily, an increase in the sense of self equals increase in looking out for survival, sort of a me versus others or me versus the world sort of attitude. This logically results in an increased baseline of anxiety and stress, since everything seems dangerous and you feel like trying to hoard resources in order to survive. So you're always on the lookout for these resources as well. In short, when this selfing happens, your mental state degrades. Along with this comes a lot of different symptoms as well. So, number one, there is an increase in baseline dukkha, as we just discussed. So, for example, just dissatisfaction for no reason at all, existential crisis or existential dread, feelings of anxiety and depression, that is sadness, but without an actual incident or a cause. Number two, it changes your outlook or your perception of life as well, or what's happening around you. It's sort of like the opposite of having rose tinted glasses, which I almost like to call poop tinted glasses or poop stained glasses, which is a state where pleasant stuff or stuff that would normally be seen as nice feels okayish, like it has lost its taste. And you start finding fault in neutral stuff, or neutral stuff suddenly feels far more offensive. And unpleasant stuff is just unbearable. You become really angry and frustrated with these sort of experiences. So your perception is altered while the state exists. Like you'd react to the same thing in a more wholesome manner on one day, but on other days, maybe not as much. So you'd be you'll be acting out in these unwholesome manners on those days. As an example, on some days, even if you read the news about a potential recession, it wouldn't really faze you. But on other days, even a small loss in the stock market of 1 or 2% would upset you deeply, and you'll start thinking all doom and gloom and become very anxious and worried. And also, in general, this sort of degradation and this weird outlook causes you to be bitter and hateful around others as well. Third, you become far more reactive, and the reactions that you cause are far more intense and unwholesome than what you normally would, even towards seemingly small issues. Almost like the process, this stress making process, has been put on steroids and it has been turned up a notch, so the reactivity goes up. You are more likely to also cling and be aversive. So, as an example, the bike or the motorbike sound that we discussed earlier, if you heard that and you conjured up a mental image of a young couple riding that bike, on a good day without that mental degradation, you'd probably wish them well and yeah, feel happy for them. But on a day when your mental state has been degraded, you'll probably not be as wholesome and might even think, yeah, bad things about them. So summarizing this point, it's almost like most evils in this world are committed because of having this very degraded mental state, because it almost makes you react in these intense ways as well. And fourth and finally, it seems like the dukkha that is caused by the previous link, the reactive intention or the reaction link, the amount of dukkha that can happen in a state is determined again by that mental state. So there is a maximum threshold of the amount of dukkha that you'll probably feel by these reactions. But when your mental state degrades, the maximum threshold goes up as well. So you'll probably feel far more stressed out when you act out in similar manners, but in a lower mental level. So, if this chain of stress making, the entire process keeps on repeating itself and you don't stop, you don't intervene, then the process of mental degradation continues. And because you didn't intervene, you can soon fall into deep depressive or almost hellish states for some time, for days, for weeks, or even longer. Now, talking back about the first link that we saw until now, attention. Ultimately, uh, even attention, like all other links, is impermanent and not perfectly controllable, and it's set up using some pre-existing conditions. It depends on some other causes itself. If it were yours, or if you were the observer, then you'd probably be able to control it perfectly all the time. And anyone who has ever tried meditation would be able to attest to the fact that that is laughable. Uh, you would have been able to instruct it to not cling, knowing the stuff that you know now. But attention is produced through some causes as well, and hence is controlled ultimately by those causes. And it changes or even stops existing based on any change or the removal of those causes as well. Now, there are two links or sub processes that act as the cause for attention. These links exist before attention ever emerges. Now, the link just before attention emerges is something that we called intention, or what I also like to call doership. So these are verbal, bodily, and mental intentions as well. For example, self talk or just talking out loud, or bringing up memories, or just doing logical analysis, and bodily movements like moving your hands and your feet or getting up from your bed. Now, I call this doership or intentions with the feeling of being a controller or doer of these actions, just a feeling, because these intentions aren't ultimately perfectly controlled by a central you or a central self or a central I am who acts as a dictator. There is no central dictator controlling all of these intentions. If that were the case, as in there was a dictator controlling these intentions, Why is it that sometimes you can't study or do chores even when you know that it's important and the right thing to do at that time? So rather than a dictator, a better model to explain this is a parliament model filled with members of parliament or MPs. This is something that I saw or first saw in the book The Mind Illuminated. Now, in this model, there is no central controller, but let's say 500 or so MPs or member of parliament who have their own agendas and they team up together to vote on the next bill to pass. That is the next intention to do. These members are not things either, so they are not these little selves, but these are just processes or causes and conditions similar to how a wind blows just because there are causes like pressure differences. Now, the way this link gives rise to or even affects the attention link is that any intention done using doership, or in simpler terms, effort, gives rise to attention. So, effort here means fighting against resistance or trying to forcefully do something that can't easily be changed or that is against whatever the universe or whatever the nature wants. Again, I'm saying that can't easily be changed. Example, forcing your attention to be on a meditation object even if it naturally wants to be somewhere else. This act of forcefulness is violence in the subtlest sense, and it is effort leading to the illusion of being a controller or doer. So, this slight sense of self in this doership causes further more sense of self, that is, an observer to become activated. It's almost like the mental process sees the need for further selfing just because of this initial sense of self. And then it activates the process even more, so to say. So that's how intention gives rise to attention and then a sense of an observer. Also, it influences the way attention behaves after its birth as well. Sort of like it decides what flavor this attention is going to have. I like to divide intention into three types: effortless intention or intention without this doership feeling, wholesome intention, and unwholesome intention. The last two do have a sense of effort or doership in it. Now, effortless intention technically doesn't contribute to this link, so we'll leave that for later. But the efforted kind, which is technically intention with doership, changes the behavior or the flavor of attention. If the mind forms intentions that contribute even more to this illusion of an independent self, the attention gets set up to have a higher flavor of the selfing as well. And it makes it more likely to crave and cling in the future. Such intentions are unwholesome intentions. Example, intention related to stealing, to hoard wealth or something along those lines, to use harsh speech, or to produce thoughts of ill will, or just even as subtle as wanting to focus your attention on a pleasant sensation so that you can suck out more pleasantness out of it. By the way, interestingly, you can tell when you're applying effort, especially the unwholesome kind. These intentions, or rather the feeling of doing these intentions, sort of appear as a nuclei or center of this intention making in our mind body space. So, for example, for bodily intentions, it almost feels like there's a feeling or a sensation near my lower back or my hips. For verbal intentions, it feels like there's a sensation near my jaw or my cheeks. And for mental intentions, it's usually around my forehead or just to the side of it. Also, as a side note, these efforting intentions can almost also cause restlessness. So if you feel restless, you're probably using these effortful and mostly unwholesome intentions also. In short, if your mind isn't careful about the type of intentions it produces, it'll make it more likely for this dukkha process to unfold. Now, finally, the very first link that starts this chain, this process of creating dukkha, is unawareness or ignorance. Now, even though there is no dictator and we have these MPs voting for intentions, like we discussed, these MPs are really smart. If they see a pattern that's causing pain needlessly to your mind and body, they would probably do something to prevent it. After all, if you notice your hand burning and see that it's happening because you kept your hand on a hot stove, you will instantly remove it. So, why don't the MPs stop producing these poorly formed intentions, the unwholesome intentions that lead to dukkha, and this entire chain that we're discussing? It's because they simply aren't aware or are ignorant of the fact that their own intentions, their own votes are causing this dukkha. In their ignorance, they think it is just the outside world or the conditions that cause this dukkha, and they blame it on all of these conditions. But if a majority of them were able to see this chain that I just described in real time, they would immediately vote to stop that intention. But because of a lack of awareness of what is happening right now, most of them don't see this, or at least not a majority to change anything. This lack of awareness is similar to feeling foggy in your mind or feeling tunnel visioned without any larger context, or even just mentally sleepy. It's sort of similar to being drunk too. That's why you sometimes do embarrassing stuff or do self harmful acts when you're drunk. So that's it. In summary, each of these links set up conditions for the next link to emerge, or for some of these links to occur with a delay of 2 seconds or maybe sometime even after. But they do set up conditions so that the further links can happen when they need to happen. Now, recapping all of these links, if your mind is unaware or is hazy, it'll automatically sometimes produce these intentions, these unwholesome intentions that lead to your attention being open to further clinging. When this clinging happens or the attention is repelled, it causes reactiveness that causes mental degradation and an increase in dukkha alongside that as well. So, as we discussed hedonism in the previous video, hedonism has this issue of dukkha building up if you're enjoying pleasures in this clingy sort of a manner. And alongside that, your mental state keeps degrading. And that gets revealed once that pleasure is over. So you could potentially fall into really bad mental states over time. Also, the Buddhists amongst you would know that the stuff that I'm describing right now is basically what the Buddha discovered. This video and the video before this cover the second noble truth out of the four noble truths that he presented. And this entire chain of creating dukkha is called dependent origination. The terms that I used are generally translated as rebirth, becoming, consciousness, and formations. The game of going up and down these mental states, it's called samsara. Now, why is this selfing process called rebirth? Now, that is something that we can look into maybe in the future. So, while this video and probably the previous videos might have seemed too doomy and gloomy for some folks, it's a reality. But in the next videos, we'll see the good news, how we can actually get rid of this dukkha. So, try and see if some of you could tell how we could use this cause and effect mechanism to actually bring an end to this dukkha as well.